Hey everybody, welcome back to the Muscle Intelligence Podcast. I am your host, Ben Pakulski. Dr. Mark Gordon joins me today. He is an expert in the field of neuro regenerative medicine and the treatment of traumatic brain injuries. He's a strong advocate for functional medicine and promoting wellness by correcting the underlying root cause, not the symptom. We don't treat the symptom, we treat the cause. Dr. Gordon is a pioneer in recognizing traumatic brain injuries as a cause of hormonal deficiencies. Here's the tie-in for you guys. Sometimes as young athletes, we have brain injuries, brain trauma, and ultimately concussions, and this can massively cause hormonal challenges as we age. And so many people miss this. If you haven't noticed, there's a trend in muscle intelligence lately. I'm trying to support everyone and ultimately optimizing their hormones and their knowledge and their understanding of hormones. Originally, he was a trained resident in family medicine. He continued his medical education, which eventually accumulated in interventional endocrinology, a term which he coined in 2003. And Dr. Gordon is a strong advocate for preventative medicine through optimization of neuroactive compounds and neurosteroids. And I'll talk to you all about what that is. He has presently joined forces with a charitable foundation called Warrior Angels and Task Force Dagger to provide services to members of the armed forces and active veterans because of the prevalence and prominence of brain injuries there. He is truly a pioneer in the space of brain injuries and how to protect yourself and ultimately the influences of hormones. A few points from today's interview: how to protect your brain, how to support insulin management at the level of the brain, which is a huge problem as we age. Alzheimer's, they suggest, is actually going to be type 3 diabetes. Diabetes of the brain causes signs and symptoms of chronic brain inflammation and how to begin addressing it. And here's the thing. I don't care how old you are. You could be 7 years old and have brain inflammation from a poor diet. You could be 7 years old and have brain inflammation from any type of head trauma. Gentlemen, ladies, listen up. Share this podcast with someone you know who may be experiencing brain trauma. It's not just something that you'll notice as like, oh, my head hurts. It may be things like brain fog, poor emotional regulation, poor sleep, over anxious and stressed behaviors. Listen to the podcast. Dr. Gordon talks so much about it. How to ultimately treat low testosterone, what tests to look for, and additional markers of inflammation, the best practices and long-term use, plus why testosterone is such a powerful anti-inflammatory hormone for the body and how to use it to support that correct usage and dosages for DHA and pregnenolone, and ultimately how to watch out for cholesterol building up during hormone replacement therapy. Last but not least, the benefits of growth hormone, how to cycle it in a way that supports your body's natural rhythms. Today's podcast is brought to you by our incredible friends over at Bioptimizers, some of the highest quality products on the market today. If you're not already using their magnesium breakthrough, get it. You will not regret it. 7 different types of magnesium to ultimately help you thrive. It's their flagship product. It's truly unique. It's one of the supplements that I recommend most to my clients. In fact, I think most, if not all of my clients are taking it and feel better because of it. It's one of those supplements that you don't notice when you're not on it, but when you're on it, you'll often notice things like better stress management, better mood, less irritability and agitation. Ultimately, stress and anxiety deplete your magnesium levels. Low magnesium can contribute to anxiety, and anxiety contributes to low magnesium. So it's this vicious cycle. I recommend taking 2 magnesium breakthrough caps before bed, but don't listen to me. Consult your physician or your healthcare practitioner. Head over to bioptimizers.com/muscle, bioptimizers.com/muscle. Use the code muscle10 at checkout. Now on to the podcast. Dr. Mark Gordon, you are a wealth of information. We've been spending some time enjoying some banter back and forth with respect to brain optimization, hormone optimization, and I'm truly grateful to welcome you to the Muscle Intelligence Podcast today.
Thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity.
We were just going on, I kind of just organically nerding out over some brain optimization strategies.
Right.
You just started eloquently wrapping off, what people should be thinking about or what you think about ultimately when it comes to how to be 71 years old and still have the brain of, probably better than most teenagers out there. And I'd love to, if you just keep going on that path of talking about brain energy as being kind of the root of everything we do at the level of the brain.
Absolutely. It's a great area, and it melds right into, the area of traumatic brain injury that I work in, because in any form of longevity, someone who's living long, what happens is you accumulate a lot of the inflammatory chemistry of life. generating energy. And what happens is over a course of time, that side effect, the junk that our brain accumulates, will lead to a decrease in our energy powerhouses called mitochondria and their ability to generate energy. That energy, or electricity, if you will, is what runs all the biochemical processes and the communication in the brain, from neuron to neuron, from lobe of the brain to different lobe of the brain, for visual, for recall, for colors, for everything that our brain is responsible for. It needs energy. And so what happens as we mature, we do more things to damage our brain's ability to make energy just by living. Drinking alcohol is negative. Certain medication, drugs, trauma to the brain will affect the mitochondria. So the question is, how have we been able to improve memory, whether or not it's short-term or long-term memory? And that's been through increasing or augmenting the substrates, the products that the brain needs, the mitochondria need for energy production. And the two most important ones that we've found are these products that are called CoQ10 or ubiquinol, and another one called PQQ, which is in the family of the ubiquinins or ubiquinols, which are the CoQ10s, and they've both been put into the family of vitamin B, the B family. And the PQQ and the CoQ10 are very important for upregulating the production of ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is the electron, the electricity, the molecule that generates all the power for running all systems in the body. Now, the difference between PQQ and CoQ10 is the fact that PQQ is between 100 and 1,000 times stronger than CoQ10 is. It also will increase the amount of mitochondria that are in each cell, where CoQ10 really doesn't do that. And it's a thing called the SIRT1 or the SIRT genes, which is what resveratrol stimulates. But PQQ does it much better. Quercetin does it just as well. In 7 days, you can start doubling your mitochondria in the cells. So there are a group of nutraceuticals or natural products that you can use to augment the number of mitochondria, and then you need to feed it. You need to feed it with carbohydrates.
Yeah.
That's why, certain of the diet trends that are out there, I'm not in agreement. Starvation without carbohydrates, the brain works on carbohydrates, so you need it. So things like PQQ and CoQ10, when you put them together, they double each of their individual effects by increasing the production of ATP. The PQQ also removes a lot of the inflammatory free radicals, which are contraproductive towards mitochondrial production of ATP. So you get that additional benefit. So if you make more ATP, you've got a much clearer brain. And all our, I work with only military, and they've had blast trauma, and their complaints are, aside from libido, which is probably ubiquitous, is their memory, whether or not it's long-term memory or short-term memory, or their ability just to do simple tasks of mathematics or, communication recall and so forth. And when we increase drop their inflammation and increase their mitochondrial functioning, what you get is an improvement in cognition, in mental functioning. And there's a lot of literature out there talking about, more recently, talking about mitochondrial dysfunction, the failure of mitochondria to work as we get older, and then it's made even worse by certain traumas, whether or not it's trauma from a car accident or a blast from an IED or a hit on the head or certain repetitive procedures that we do, it leads to diminished functioning.
Yeah, that's so helpful. I know I don't want you to go into dosing and stuff like that, but timing of those supplements, is that something you recommend people take at certain times of the day?
No, you can take the PQQ and CoQ10 when you like. And the dosing for the PQQ is by itself about 20 milligrams. But if you mix the PQQ with CoQ10 of about 50 milligrams, you can go as high as 100. It would be about 10 milligrams. It's an expensive product, PQQ, but it works so very well. And some of the side effects protects the heart. protects the heart from congestive heart failure. They found that PQQ and CoQ10 help to improve the heart, as well as DHT from testosterone, extremely important for the contractility of the heart, called inotropism. So it's, a lot of benefits throughout the body, and we're just talking about one real small area.
Yeah. So one of my evening snacks, I'll take my CoQ10, my PQQ, and my resveratrol every night before bed.
Right.
I just find, for me, maybe some research I read about the benefit of antioxidants before bed to allow your brain to actually, while you're not consuming food, you're detoxifying those nutrients to be prevalent in the brain to kind of get rid of those potential toxins and allow the brain to be energized while you're recovering. I don't know if that makes sense. I believe it was years ago that I read that.
It makes a lot of sense. And in fact, our product, which is called Brain Care 2, which drops the inflammation throughout the body, but focused on the brain, we recommend that they take it pre-dinner so that during the nighttime, they get the benefits of it while they're sleeping.
So one of the most fascinating areas of research right now, certainly you're very deep in, is brain inflammation. And you touched on it a little bit with Brain 2. And where I thought I was really interested to hear your perspective is on how it's impacting testosterone, because a lot of our men in my community are, one, either experiencing low testosterone symptoms, two, realize it's coming if they're not already, and three, considering hormone replacement. And I think, you are very well versed in all those areas, but you're the first person I've ever had come on the show and say, hey, this is a brain inflammation, or one factor here is brain inflammation that's really cutting down people's ability to produce testosterone, where it ultimately all starts at the level of the brain. So I'd love to have you just kind of talk about that and explain to our gentlemen listening what's going on.
Yeah, it's a very important scientific fact, as well as appreciation, so that when you do jump into hormonal modulation, that you first fix the body. Because that's the reason for the loss of testosterone production. In 2013, I came across one of many articles that talked about a specific mechanism by which both males and females lose the stimulation of, in females, the theca glands, and males, the Leydig cells for making testosterone. And that's when there is any form of inflammation in the brain. What it does is it shuts down the area of the brain called the hypothalamus that's responsible for making the initial signal called gonadotropic releasing hormone, which goes to the pituitary to turn on both luteinizing hormone, LH, which specifically turns on testosterone production, both males and females, and then follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, which turns on the production of ova and in females and the sperm production in males. So we have this, I won't go into the deep dive, I'll keep it on the surface, where they show that the inflammation shuts off something that regulates the ability of the hypothalamus to do that task of sending out the GnRH, the gonadotropic releasing hormone, to have the pituitary release it. So what we've been doing over the past 10 years has been addressing the inflammation, whether or not that inflammation occurred from a motorcycle accident, a motor vehicle accident, a slip and fall, or assault with head trauma, or one of the many causes in the military that we see. We address the inflammation and monitor their response on luteinizing hormone. And what we find is that their level does go up. Now, we use an array of nutraceutical, natural products that have an incredible amount of science showing how it alters the inflammatory cascades throughout the brain. There are a lot of them. The one that's the key one is called pro-inflammatory cytokines. Cytokines are part of the immune system, which are released when certain parameters are met that cause a flooding of the brain with these perceived initially protective cytokines. And they are protective when when the brain's acutely exposed to interleukin-1, 1B, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and interleukin-6, that these are produced acutely to help take care of a virus, a bacteria, or if there's been trauma to the brain from being one of the assaults or one of the physical traumas that happens. and it helps to clean up the area. But if you have a repetitive problem or repetitive trauma, like in football or in boxing or in exposure in the field of battle with a 50 caliber machine gun or a breacher blowing up doors or gaining access to, spaces, these repetitive injuries will keep the process chronic. And in fact, we found 17 years plus after one injury, the chemistry of the brain is still making these inflammatory cytokines, interleukin-6. And that is what causes a chronic inflammation of the brain, which causes the shutdown of not only production of testosterone, but thyroid, growth hormone. So you've got thyroid, growth hormone, and testosterone. Growth hormone in about 100% of the cases of trauma to the brain, regardless of if it's a physical trauma or a non-physical trauma, meaning a blast wave or chronic stress, just pure stress. It will lead to a shutdown in growth hormone, number one, and then testosterone, and then thyroid, and then cortisol. So you see this progression depending upon how long you're exposed to this inflammatory main loop. And one of the areas that I always find myself in polite argument with the experts out there in PTSD and post-traumatic stress disorder or post-traumatic stress is the fact that they believe that PTS or PTSD is due to nothing more than pure stress and psychological. So it's categorized as a pure psychiatric illness. Well, Dr. Daniel Pearl in Washington, who's a histologist, a brain specialist who does sections of the brain in 20,000 veterans who had died from this PTSD scenario. And what he found is every single one of them had damage to the brain similar to what happens with CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is usually in boxers. And he found these punched out areas in the brains of these people who were given this 100% psychiatric diagnosis of PTSD. And he asked a very important question. He said, how is it that a purely psychiatric illness leads to a physical damage to the brain? Well, we now know as of 9 years ago why that happens. And that's because under pure stress, a chemical called fractalkine is dropped. And it allows for the inflammatory mechanisms of the brain to go wild. And that high inflammation leads to damage of the brain. So inflammation is one of the key factors leading to not only loss of testosterone, but growth hormone and thyroid.
The first time I heard that molecule, I literally never heard it before, was from you. And I looked it up and couldn't find a huge amount on fractalkine. I'd love to have you walk through what that is, because,
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll be more than happy to send you my portfolio. It's about 10 years ago now that it started coming out. What happens in the brain is incredible. Now, our entire body, the way it was designed, whoever designed this really designed this with a lot of thought into it. So what happens with stress, we're talking about this issue of fractalkine from purely a psychiatric standpoint. Under chronic stress, cortisol goes up. And when cortisol goes up, the neurons, nerve cells that are responsible for making this immune system called fractalkine, it's called a chemokine. Fractalkine, what it does is it keeps the white blood cells of the brain called microglia, it keeps them in a sedentary state. And they're not really sedentary like, when we get into 100 years of age where we do nothing. They're surveilling, really. They're looking for viruses, bacteria. They're looking for junk that's been generated from breakdown of cells, and they will start the process of clearing it out. But it's very well controlled. When cortisol goes up, the neurons shut off their production of fractalkine, and it allows the microglia, these immune systems, to go wild and start dumping cytokines, pro-inflammatory cytokines. And it's those pro-inflammatory cytokines that lead to the damage of all areas of the brain. So when you start damaging things, you start throwing off free radicals. The free radicals do what? They turn on the microglial cells or the glial cells to produce more inflammation. And so you get this cascade of events. So when the stress is gone, and it's acute stress, what happens is your neurons start making more of this fractalkine, and they calm down the microglia. And the microglia also go through two phases, one where they're pro-inflammatory, and then a second phase, which is anti-inflammatory. Well, it turns out that testosterone, extremely important at dropping the pro-inflammatory cytokines, the ones that I rambled off, interleukin 1, 1B, 6, and 2-glucose factor alpha, it reduces those. Testosterone does. And on another side, testosterone increases the innate immune system, as well as it increases the production of an anti-inflammatory cytokine called IL-10, interleukin 10, which is probably one of the strongest ones for dropping inflammation. So testosterone shuts off the inflammatory pro-inflammatory cytokines and increases the anti-inflammatory. So the benefit of testosterone for dropping inflammation throughout the entire body is impressive, as well as is estradiol. And that's why using things like aromatase inhibitors are really bad, because you're taking away the benefits of estradiol on modulating inflammation, as well as testosterone and estradiol remove the chemical called beta amyloid or amyloid beta, which causes Alzheimer's disease. Testosterone and estradiol help to remove it from the cell through a transport mechanism called neprilysin on the membrane of the cells. So the importance of testosterone and estradiol as we mature becomes extremely important to help us with our brain functioning, to stop dementia, to stop Alzheimer's.
That's interesting, right? Because if I'm following you correctly, elevated cortisol is causing this suppression in fractalkine, which then allows inflammation to go up even
Correct.
more. But then that will further suppress testosterone, right? So it's right. So if you're not getting the testosterone benefit because of the elevated inflammation, then you're not going to have the ability. It's like this almost catch-22 situation where if you don't have testosterone present to begin with.
Absolutely. So the question is, what do you do? Well,
what do you do?
Yeah. What do we do is for a temporary period of time, we'll put them on clomiphene citrate or e-clomiphene, which will force, through a secondary mechanism, will force the hypothalamus to increase this GnRH that is shut off by inflammation and go and turn on luteinizing hormone. So you start generating more testosterone. As you generate more testosterone in conjunction with the anti-inflammatory products that we use, what happens is inflammation goes down and then the system comes back on. We've got a number of guys, our oldest right now, Josh out of Austin, Texas, ex-military. It took him 6 months for him to being on clomiphene citrate, 6 months for his own system to kick back on. He was on the anti-inflammatories as well as he got off of 8 medications in 6 months. Okay. Wow. So what we do is what we can to stimulate the production of testosterone. Now, I think we've spoken about this in our prior conversation, which I'll reiterate here. What we do when we find anybody that is deficient in testosterone, obviously we've got a clinical history to see if they've had some kind of a trauma that might predispose them to testosterone deficiency. And when we find that, we'll put them on to clomiphene citrate protocol of 50 milligrams every 72 hours at bedtime and monitor them at 90 days and then 180 days to see how they respond. There are some people who have burnt out their system. I have a 43-year-old vet who burnt out his system by using 200 milligrams of testosterone cypionate every Sunday for 5 years straight. He burnt out his system. We couldn't regenerate his system. But the majority of people with traumas or inflammation or low-dose testosterone TRT use in the past were able to regenerate their system. The funny thing that, I don't know if it's funny, but we have a protocol called the hybrid protocol, which is a combination of low dose blended testosterone with clomiphene citrate. I had one of my clients say, doc, the majority of doctors out there will put you on recovery treatment, whether or not it's beta-HCG or clomiphene citrate, when you finish your cycle of 12 weeks or whatever on testosterone, right?
Yes.
And I said to him, absolutely, but think of it this way. You've got a brand new Porsche and you drive it 60 miles an hour into a wall and then put the seatbelt on. So what we do is we put the seatbelt on in the beginning to protect you from that wall that you're going to create and hit down the road. Okay? So what it does is... Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so what it does is it protects your system, and what we call it is biological integrity. You want to keep the circuitry running. When you use testosterone for a long time, or you use the DHT congeners like Anavar or Winstrol or, all the things that are out there, Triple and so forth, what they do is they shut your system down incredibly. Testosterone has a one factor for shutting down luteinizing hormone. Tribolone, Anavar, all those DHT congeners, they look like DHT, are 3 times stronger at shutting down your luteinizing hormone. Okay? So understanding the game you're playing, you need to, back your bets and have a safety net. And it's not 12 weeks down the road after you've hammered your system with, great combinations like Lou Allen has in his book, some great combinations of anabolics.
I just had a doctor.
Mandatory reading. That was mandatory reading. Lou Allen's book.
Whose book is it?
Lou Allen? Oh, unbelievable. He's a street TRT expert. He's not a doc, but he's put together some really good literature. Lou Allen. What is it? Lewelen or WE? Lou Allen. And it's called the Anabolic Handbook. I haven't had one more than 10 years ago. I got it because I was seeing a lot of guys from the industry, entertainment and from sports and whatever else that wanted to get onto anabolic steroids. And what we had was a safe harbor where it would be really balanced and well thought out hormonal replacement, replenishment, or treatment with laboratory testing and monitoring.
James Llewellyn, yeah? Is it James?
Yeah, James Llewellyn.
No, I think it's William, actually. I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah, but the last name Llewellyn. It's the steroid and every year, you know the book, yeah.
I do. So I just had a doc on the show named Dr. Scott Howell, and we actually went through mechanistically exactly what's happening. And so you said it ultimately at the beginning of the show, but just to bring it back and point it out, luteinizing hormone out of the pituitary, stimulating testosterone production in the Leydig cells, follicle-stimulating hormone directly stimulating the spermatogenesis.
Right.
And both of those get shut down when you're taking testosterone exogenously. So we're ultimately just, by taking Clomid or HCG, we're supporting LH and FSH so they don't shut down. You don't shut down your natural production as long or as much, and you don't shut down spermatogenesis, the production of sperm. So a lot of guys are concerned, like, hey, if I could take testosterone, I might be able to have kids. And this seems like it may, I don't want to say solve the problem, but at least mitigate it.
Well, yeah, it does diminish and to a degree mitigate it. And the way that we know that it stops it or mitigates it is by doing every 90 days a luteinizing hormone test to see where it's at. And a good level, the median of the range by most labs is around 5. So, when they're less than, whenever it says less than, it means the technology that they're using at the lab can't pick up 1 iota of the marker or the hormone that you're after. So we like to keep our levels at about 1. And, 5 is ideal. Less than 0.07 is where our lab's at, which is none. So it gets down really low on metering it. So we try to keep it active. And the real reason is because, let's say you're on what we call a hybrid protocol, 50 milligrams of clomiphene citrate and whatever dosing of their testosterone. They stop their testosterone, or they break the bottle, or they run out of it, or they're in another country or something. They're not going to crash and burn. they stay on the Clomid and they'll have recurrence or improvement, reestablishment of their natural testosterone production. But I think we might have talked about one of the hidden causes for testosterone not being made is an anti-inflammatory product, specifically a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory product called ibuprofen, Motrin.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in 2018 was a very intense article out of Denmark where they actually looked at people who are on long-term ibuprofen and how it influences their ability to make testosterone. And right before this the podcast, I was on the line with a veteran who had actually that. He had lost his testosterone production because he had been on 800 milligrams of ibuprofen for 2 or 3 times a day for about a year, which is, they call it vitamin M for Motrin. They call it Skittles. They call it pain meds. And how it disrupts the ability of our luteinizing hormone to turn on Leydig cells is that it desensitizes, it shuts off the receptors that are connected to the production of testosterone. So on the cells called Leydig cells, which make testosterone, they have a receptor, which is a button, let's say, called luteinizing hormone button. And when your luteinizing hormone comes and touches that button, start making testosterone. But what happens from ibuprofen, it makes that button rusted, so you can't push it. It's rusted, so it can't be pressed. So what we were able to do with this gentleman that I spoke with is putting him on to a higher dose, same dose, 50 milligrams, but higher frequency. Instead of every 72 hours, we had him on every 48 hours. And we now see that he's producing more testosterone and his luteinizing hormone level is lower. Okay? So that he doesn't need as much luteinizing hormone to stimulate his testicles, Leydig cells in the testes, to make more testosterone. So we have a growing group because most of our Army vets, that he was Air Force, most of our vets have been put on to large doses of Motrin, ibuprofen, for many, many years. And we're seeing the pattern. I'll send you the article so you can put it into your data.
Yeah, we'll link to it in the show notes because I think the audience is very interested in this stuff. We have a lot of practitioners that listen, and also men just want to optimize. So definitely something I'd like to be able to link to and support people with understanding in the future.
Yeah, I have
a question that's but
yeah, I have most of this stuff posted on my website, but I think I'll send you a copy of everything so that people can come to your website and get it too.
Yeah, and we'll link to your website as well. So I have a question that's along these lines, but a bit of a tangent. So I went through 3 research articles this morning that spoke about mechanistically interleukin-6 being one of the primary regulatory mechanisms as to why we stop training. So you think of an athlete, a pro athlete, someone working out, elevations into interleukin-6 can literally shut down the primary motor cortex or its ability to coordinate action, coordinate movement. So I'd like to understand that mechanism. And if you have any suggestions or advice on how to acutely, like, because we want inflammation post-exercise, but if it's shutting down my ability to exercise intra-exercise, is there anything you know of that could acutely, like really acutely, shut down or at least diminish interleukin-6 responses such that I can train longer, harder, more frequently?
Absolutely. Great, complex questions. And I'll go from the end forward. DHEA drops interleukin-6 production. Study after study has shown that it influences the interleukin-6. Second part, or this next part, is when you get a cold, you feel smarter or less smart?
Less.
When you have a cold, how much do you want to go into the gym and work out?
Not a lot.
When you have a cold, how much time do you want to spend in bed as opposed to doing everything you normally do?
Most motivation is crushed.
When you get a cold, interleukin-6 goes up. And interleukin-6 is responsible for shutting down a lot of pathways, whether or not it's in the cortex or it's in the occipital lobe or the temporal lobe with word skills. And it also increases another product when you have this cold or you have this inflammation in the brain called peroxynitrite. And peroxynitrite will increase your pain and will increase your sensitivity to working out. Okay, you're working out and you feel a little bit of lactic acid related issues. Well, you can diminish your lactic acid by DHEA and DHT, which comes from testosterone, because what they do is they increase the presence of glucose in the myocytes, muscle cells, which is called glycogen. So you can actually increase glycogen. That's on the periphery. But going back to the core of your question, centrally, the brain is responsible for everything we think is coming from our muscles. Our ability to lift that extra 20 pounds in those bench presses or in the deadlifts, it's all coming from the brain. And if you have anything that puts in a doubt in your brain, and we'll call that doubt diminished energy, okay? Because when you're full of energy, you're dead on, you're straightforward, everything is crystal clear, you know exactly your goal. But when you have something that's pulling at that energy in your brain and causing doubt, you start doubting yourself, whether you can do it. We talked about it before the show about how our mental status is so very important for determining our outcome in what we do.
Yep.
So if you have elevated interleukin-6, getting on things like, or being on DHEA, 25 or 50 milligrams, 15 to 30 minutes after dinner. Why after dinner? And most people take it in the morning. I mean, the organization that I used to be with would push it in the morning. Well, it turns out that if you take DHEA at 15 to 30 minutes after a meal to help it absorb, it'll boost your growth hormone production in males 10%, in females 15 to 20%. So you get the benefit of this side hack that the DHEA does. Okay?
And that makes tons of sense. That was one of the major longevity studies, wasn't it? Growth hormone, DHEA, and metformin as being one of the best kind of combinations for enhancing longevity. I'm not a fan of metformin, but DHEA and growth hormone both sound like they're friends.
Yeah, I don't use metformin. What we do is we improve the way that insulin works. You know, in our brain function, I mean, if you look at a lot of the studies that came out of Alzheimer's research, they found that part of the symptomatology that occurs with the memory recall, the inability to do sequential processes, your decision of what's good and what's bad, making appropriate, decisions on things, is influenced by starvation of neurons. So what happens in Alzheimer's is an inflammatory process, and that inflammation leads to a diminished amount of sugar getting into the neurons. And that's because of loss of IGF-1, loss of testosterone, loss of DHEA, loss of DHT. So that's where growth hormone becomes very important in Alzheimer's case, okay, to help improve the sugar absorption, because growth hormone stimulates the liver to make IGF-1, which has a 10% crossover to insulin. But you can actually improve insulin sensitivity at the cells with chromium. Chromium polynicotinate is a cofactor for allowing insulin to open up the cell to bring in glucose, a GLUT4 receptor. So the chromium, we've reversed 29 cases of type 2 insulin-resistant diabetes by chromium, DHEA, and DHT. And I have, the laboratory results and the treatment protocol showing 90 days after they're on it, their insulin levels that were freaking sky high and their blood sugar all normalized.
And you're directly administering DHT?
No, you give testosterone to become DHT.
In that case, are you concerned with oxidative stress of testosterone, like you're intentionally increasing polyphenols and antioxidants, or just covering with CoQ10 and PQQ?
I like our polyphenols. I use a lot of them for free radical scavenging, and also quercetin is one, comes from apples and all these nice fruits, but it has so many benefits, increases IGF binding protein 3, which is a carrier for IGF-1, but more importantly, It's an anti-cancer product. Protein 3 is...
You taking that daily?
I have 500 milliliters of quercetin on a regular day. When COVID was happening, I was taking 1,000 with 30 milligrams of zinc, because quercetin is a pleiotropic product. Pleiotropic means it has many functions. So it's a polyphenol free radical scavenger. It increases IGF binding protein 3 in the liver. It increases mitochondrial reproduction. It helps with inotropic, which carries zinc into the cell. So you carry zinc into the cell, it blocks SARS 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, influenza A and B. Also, it helps with something in the brain called SOD, superoxide dismutase system, which is a major anti-inflammatory system of the brain. The zinc SOD is very important for protecting the brain. Zinc also increases testosterone production, increases sperm production. I mean, quercetin helps zinc get into the cells to do their work. So,
a brilliant supplement. I've heard, and you can tell me if this is wrong, I actually take that early in the day because it seems to, in some people, affect sleep if you take it late in the day.
Yeah, it can. But think of it this way. When you correct the chemistry of the brain, so it's running like a Lamborghini engine as opposed to running like a 2-stroke motorcycle, okay?
Yeah.
Mini bike, okay? What happens is you've got more energy. And one of the things is testosterone can do that as well. That's why, when do we normally take testosterone in the morning? And one of the effects of testosterone, good and bad, it's a double-edged sword, is that testosterone in some people will cause a chemical called adenyl cyclase in the brain to go up. Adenyl cyclase is like methamphetamine IV, push. So in some people, you get this increase in this adenyl cyclase, and you'll be like full of energy. Certain people, and you might have seen it throughout your exposure, certain people would get really agitated, edgy, reactive when they're on testosterone. And it might be a low dose, or it might be low dose repetitively over a course of time. It's because it accumulates in the brain and creates this adenyl cyclase process. So we did a study of 140 patients on a product, an oral nanoliposomally delivered testosterone. 2 people out of 140 within 30 minutes developed panic attack with a history of never having anxiety or panic. And that's what led me almost 12 years ago to start looking at this mechanism, why that happens. Also, in someone who takes pregnenolone, I talk a lot about when you're on testosterone to take pregnenolone and also to take DHEA. Well, I had a rare occurrence of people who went on DHEA and pregnenolone where they developed, they were bouncing off of walls. They were just manic, crazy, manic. It took me a couple of years to find one article that explained it to me, where pregnenolone is something that increases GABA. And GABA is the natural Valium of the brain. It calms you down or relaxes you down. They found that in a very rare person that the pregnenolone cross-talks. It means that it crosses over to the receptors that are called NMDA, which are excitatory, which is like IV of speed. So in a very rare group, I think I have 5 or 6 guys over the past 30 years that I've been using pregnenolone that have this reaction. So it's something that I share with people because I'm looking for that rare. But I have 5, 6 people. Yeah.
And is it one of those things where if you are that person, just stop taking it, or what is the kind of way to counteract it?
Great question. I have a gentleman, we start with 100 milligrams. And within 1 or 2 doses, he developed this hyper manic kind of reaction. So we stopped him. He was off it for about a month to clear his system. And then we started with 10 milligrams. And on 10 milligrams has no problem. The benefit of pregnenolone is it's a precursor to a few chemicals, the most hormones in the brain. The most important is called allopregnanolone, which is antidepressing, anti-anxiety. And it also helps, pregnenolone helps with GABA production so that you sleep better. A lot of the guys that we see have insomnia. And the insomnia is generated by the fact that they are not making melatonin. And when you have inflammation in the brain, what happens is that inflammation stops us or diminishes our brain from taking an amino acid called L-tryptophan and converting it into serotonin. So if you can't take this precursor amino acid and make a very important neurotransmitter called serotonin, you develop depression. And then what does serotonin become? Serotonin becomes melatonin, and that's what helps you sleep. So inflammation shuts off two enzymes, a hydroxylase that causes tryptophan to become the serotonin, and then decarboxylase that allows serotonin to become melatonin. So that's why we see in 100% of our veterans, we see depression, insomnia, and fatigue. And the fatigue comes from the fact that if you're not utilizing L-tryptophan to make serotonin and melatonin, it backs up and it becomes nilixic acid, not nilixic acid, it becomes an acid which is damaging to the brain function. And in fact, in a study out of Japan, a group of psychiatrists and cellular biologists believe that this nilixic acid is a better marker for depression than is serotonin. And last year or 2 years ago, an article came out of the UK showing that serotonin is basically worthless to tell us about depression because they found people with high levels who had depression. They found people with low levels who didn't have depression. So article came out, whether or not people, since you said doctors are listening to this, some of them might have read this article. So I'm just clarifying the fact that, we're finding that serotonin is not the ironclad marker for depression or lack of depression.
Two questions that I think go kind of hand in hand. Dosage and timing for pregnenolone. Okay. And I know you said 100 milligrams, but you didn't say timing. And how do we know, other than a blood test, I mean, is that obviously the gold standard? But is that how you just go with everybody? Like, hey, this symptom may be common if you have low pregnenolone.
Well, as you know, we do a full 28-point biomarker panel. And our biomarker panel took about 14 years to put it together. Now it's analyzed by computer software, an AI system. So the pregnenolone, we start with 100 milligrams and we take it 15 to 30 minutes after dinner. Why? Because it absorbs DHEA, vitamin D, and pregnenolone are called fat soluble. So in order for you to maximize absorption, you need to take it relative to food. So why we give the pregnenolone at nighttime after dinner is because we want to get the benefit of it stimulating the production of GABA so you sleep better. So you asked about what is our goal point without labs. Well, we have guys who come in and I ask them, so how many hours are you in bed? And he said, 12 hours. And I said, damn, you must wake up feeling great in the morning. And this one guy said, no, I wake up feeling like I never put my head to the pillow. Well, I already knew his pregnenolone was unmeasurable because it was so low. It was less than 5 in our lab, less than 5. It's unreadable. And it should be someplace between 80 and 100. So 2 weeks down the road, when we had our 2-week follow-up, he said, I'm sleeping like a baby. I've had people who have had that response in one day. One night.
Is that cream? Is that a cream or topical? Or sorry,
oral. And it gets absorbed very well. How do we know? Because we've got lots of studies showing that when you take oral pregnenolone, that it gets absorbed and converts to progesterone. Progesterone converts to allopregnanolone. Allopregnanolone is a pharmaceutical drug now, which is called Rososo, $34,000 a year. And it came out specifically for postpartum depression, but it also has beneficial effects on antidepressant, anti-anxiety, and improving sleep. And it's all because of how this molecule works on the brain.
Is Is there a reason why someone would take pregnenolone and not just progesterone if you said it converts into progesterone directly?
Yeah, there's no reason for you to take progesterone if the pregnenolone converts to it. And there's a 3-step or 2-step from pregnenolone to progesterone to allopregnanolone. And the enzyme 3-beta hydroxylase converts it over from.
So I've never heard of a man being prescribed progesterone. Wouldn't it just make sense? Like, is there a reason why you're doing pregnenolone? You don't want to just skip over the step and just go directly to progesterone?
Because pregnenolone actually generates 2 chemicals, progesterone and pregnenolone. So pregnenolone is important for the brain as well. And all these things that are generated there are 35 plus or minus hormones, brain hormones that are generated from pregnenolone. And what shuts it off is testosterone, because what's the rate limiting step is luteinizing hormone. If you don't have luteinizing hormone, which goes to 0 when you're on testosterone, you can't make pregnenolone from cholesterol, so cholesterol builds up, and you can't make pregnenolone, so you lose 35 hormones. That's why there's literature out there, as well as we've seen in our patient population. It was a way that I ended up with a lot more patients from my colleagues who didn't use DHT, DHEA, and pregnenolone, is that 4 to 6 months after they were put on their initial testosterone replacement therapy, TRT, they would develop problems. They weren't feeling as well as they did when they were on their testosterone for that first 4 to 6 months. They'd go to the doc and say, hey, I was feeling great in the beginning. I don't feel as good right now. And the doc would say, okay, increase your testosterone from 300 milligrams to 400 or 200 to 300 or whatever they did. And the individual would feel great for another month or 2 and then come back feeling worse. Well, it turns out that prolonged use of testosterone will lead to burnout of progesterone, pregnenolone, and allopregnanolone, and it's the allopregnanolone that's key. And there are articles. You can look at testosterone, allopregnanolone, and personality changes. Okay, if you remind me, I'll put a note, send you the T plus allo P4, P5, okay, article.
Thank you.
And
Dr. Gordon, everyone needs this information. I'm so grateful for this. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, not a problem. And that's why every individual that we do put on testosterone, whether or not it's Clomid or injectable, we'll put them on to an appropriate amount of pregnenolone and DHEA. The benefit of DHEA protects the lungs from cytokine storm precipitated by COVID, but other viruses can do that by increasing a protective chemical called DEL1. DHEA increases growth hormone in the brain. DHEA increases the coating of neurons. So in the people we see with multiple sclerosis, we're able to reverse that by stimulating their production of myelin, which is coating the nerve. DHEA is antidepressant. Back in 1953, they started seeing that DHEA, natural source of DHEA from Mexican wild yams, would reduce depression. 1993, and Dr. Morales did a major double-blind crossover study with DHEA, 30% reduction in depression. Very important. Reduction in interleukin-6, stimulation of growth hormone, just DHEA, very inexpensive product, $80 a year for 15 milligrams maybe. Pregnenolone is maybe $80 a year as opposed to $34,000 a year for this brexanolone is what they also call it, this pharmaceutical product. So pregnenolone helps anti-inflammation through the production of progesterone, very important anti-inflammatory. So to circle around to progesterone, I have used in the past low doses of progesterone in guys with horrible sleep because progesterone will increase GABA production. But, I found that I was able to generate that in most people using a good dose of pregnenolone. And that's why we went from in the past was 30, 60 milligrams to 100 milligrams. We got better responses and rare side effects on 100 milligrams. And the guy that was, in bed for 12 hours but didn't sleep in 2 weeks, he was sleeping like a baby 5 hours. I mean, I only sleep 4 to 6 hours and wake up with lots of energy because it helps you to go into a deep dive of sleep. So you get better deep sleep and better REM sleep.
I know you've been, and you said you said this when we spoke previously, but I know you like Clomid, but you said it was primarily due to, one, it's not an injection, two, it's readily available in the US. But could you kind of compare and contrast Clomid versus HCG for me? Just because I know there's a lot of people out there who ask me directly, like, hey, what do I do about HCG? I'm like, I don't know. I'll be able to direct them to this podcast.
Yeah. I did try HCG between 1980, was it 88 until probably 1995. I was seeing a lot of guys that were self-procuring their TRT protocols or HRT or whatever you want to call it, their stacks. And they would come to me to get improvement. And I put them on beta HCG, and I didn't always see it working very well. And the receptor is supposedly the same receptor as clomiphene citrate. Okay, so they both work on the same receptor. So it became now looking at convenience and cost. Well, in the past 15 years, if not longer, beta HCG went from $30 to $100 and some odd $70, and being used for that crazy worthless diet. Anybody who ate 500 calories a day is going to lose weight. And the belief that HCG is going to make you tolerate the only eating 500 calories a day, that's bullshit. What it is a placebo effect. If I lick this pen twice an hour, I'll stop eating. Okay? Because you train yourself to believe that. Yeah. Right? Mind over matter. You believe it. So anyway, it's injectable. It's now, most people don't know it, but beta HCG is monitored as a class 3 drug. Okay. Yeah. I don't think they officially converted it over into a class 3 drug, which means it has a higher proclivity for abuse. Okay. So the clomiphene citrate tablets became cost effective. It's a prescription only product, was readily available. And it was, convenient for taking it, as opposed to injectable, refrigerated. Once you mix it, you got to keep it protected from the sun. You got to keep it good temperature. Yeah, so that's the contrast. So the rationale between why.
So one thing that came up, I was listening to a Peter Attia podcast probably 2 years ago, and he said there's one marker, and I don't recall what it was, is one marker that looks like it gets significantly elevated with prolonged Clomid use that could be potentially very dangerous. Any idea what I'm talking about? I can look it up, but it's been a long
time. I don't know which one it is.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'll look it up.
There is starts with an S. It is generated by testicles being turned on, or gonads being turned on with beta HCG. And I think that's probably what it is. But what we do is we pulse the Clomid. It's not every night. When we did our 3-year veteran study in 2014, 15, and 16, at that time, I was on injectable testosterone for 17 years because my head traumas led to deficiency of growth hormone, testosterone, and thyroid. And so when I saw the results of our first year, and what the first year was about is trying to find the lowest dose and the pattern for pulsing it to give us the highest response in testosterone. And that was 50 milligrams every 72 hours. So we weren't using it daily. And I see guys that are put on 25 milligrams every day. The first thing I do is I scrap that and get them on 50 milligrams every 72 hours, and they do much better pulsing it. So when you start pulsing something, you don't have that constant production of any deleterious chemistry that can accumulate. When you're doing it all the time, you also get the side effect of the actual drug itself, if there is one, from too high of an accumulation of the clomiphene citrate. It has a 14-day half-life, but it has, it's a 31-day function in the testes. I mean, that's one of the areas that it's been a little bit obtuse for me to explain that there is a chemical half-life, and then there's the functional half-life of what the specific hormone induced in the mechanism, the mechanistic, you like that term, the mechanistic function in the cell. So, for instance, growth hormone. Why I'm on growth hormone maybe 1 month, off for 3, on for 1, and off for 3 is because they found that the intracellular mechanistic impact of growth hormone can last 8 to 12 weeks. So I don't need to be on it every day. I can cycle myself on and off of it. And that's what a lot of our patients end up doing, is cycling. They might have an orthopedic or a psychiatric or psychological intracerebral problem like inflammation. Growth hormone is phenomenal for that. Growth hormone is also phenomenal for repairing liver fibrosis or non-alcoholic fatty liver degeneration. I just sent out, I think you might have received it if you're on my Sunday journal club, about growth hormone and fibrosis of the liver. Impressive articles.
So you went and read my mind, which we were funny talking about just before we began. So the next thing I wanted to bring up is because you mentioned that you had maybe at some point supplemented with growth hormone. I'm curious if now you're still doing it, what that protocol may look like, and who you think would benefit from that. And you already went and answered in large part of the question, but if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, well, just like testosterone, TRT, before I start TRT or actually use testosterone, I'll use clomiphene citrate and see how their system responds to it. If their system responds to the clomid, what do? I don't switch them on to testosterone. We were able to get a great level of testosterone. For me, great level is 50 to 75% of the laboratory range for me, testosterone. Total testosterone, stop monitoring that. It's bullshit. What is total? It's a bunch of other chemicals, DHT, epitestosterone. Yes, testosterone bound to albumin, to corticotropic globulin. Free testosterone is the key. So the same thing we do with testosterone, we do with growth hormone. And what we do is we use a natural secretagogue or oral secretagogue called secretropin or dinotropin, which uses 5 pathways in the brain to turn on growth hormone production. In fact, 4 of them stimulate growth hormone production. 1 of them stops the turning off of growth hormone, which is through something called somatostatin. Somatostatin, when you use growth hormone, somatostatin goes up, and when it hits a threshold, shuts down your entire growth hormone system. So if we can move that threshold, the set point, everybody has their own set point. So if we can move that set point up, that means that you can get a higher level of growth hormone. Okay? So arginine is what causes the area of the hypothalamus paraventricular nucleus not to make serotonin, to reduce serotonin. And in fact, we've got maybe 2 vets who were exposed to blast trauma that damaged their hypothalamus, and specifically the area that keeps growth hormone low. Now they've got levels of growth hormone that are sky high.
Somatostatin, or you said serotonin, you mean somatostatin?
Somatostatin. I said serotonin, yeah, somatostatin. Soma, body, statin, stop. So growth, hormone, growth, body, yeah, so somatostatin. So arginine, 3 to 5 grams at nighttime, okay, will help.
Every night?
Every night for as long as you want to take it. You don't have to do it every night. You can pulse it on and off. I think there's an article floating out there where I showed a graph of how each one of the amino acids increases the production of growth hormone. How much of each amino acid will do that? So lysine, alpha-ketoglutarate, arginine, but arginine is the only one that works by stopping the negative, okay, by stoppage of growth hormone production. The other one's actually stimulated. And it could be 3 to 10 times spike in growth hormone production over baseline. And the reason why we do most of these secretagogues and manipulations at nighttime is because 8 at night until 4 in the morning is when you spike your growth hormone, your natural spike of growth hormone. So what you're doing is you're raising the threshold, you're raising the amount that's being produced. So at nighttime is the best time to take, your CJC, your ceramorelin, ipamorelin, any of those MK67, all those crazy things that are out there. And they're injectable. Our product, or the product secretropin and dinotropin, are oral. And it's been out there since 2001, went into physician-only hands in 2006, and it's being sold through a pharmacy company in San Diego throughout the United States. And now we just opened up we've been in China, we've been in Philippines, Thailand, and so forth, Southeast Asia, now into United Arab Emirates, because it works. We've got docs who are monitoring it throughout the United States. The product.
So if our listeners want to get it, they have to go to the doctor and specifically request it?
No, we have a version of it on our website, which we'll talk about. And if you want, I'll send you some so you can share it with your buds and see what they say and then feed back to me. Okay?
I'll do. So one of the questions or maybe controversial replies I get to growth hormone is people like, there's no data on that. Periodic growth hormone doesn't work for this, it doesn't work for that. There's no data on that. So if someone came into you and you prescribed growth hormone, what would be the first reason why you would prescribe and benefit you would expect the person to see? I know you kind of touched on some of them, but I put a lot of pushback on growth hormone because I think we talked about this offline.
Right. I have a graph which I've developed, between 97 till about 2005. I was called on a lot on television programs to talk about growth hormone, defending Stallone and his thing that happened in Australia. And then ESPN Outside the Line, I talked about growth hormone, had someone from UCLA go up against me, endocrinologist and so forth. The reason why we use growth hormone is because it's a pleiotropic hormone. It works on a multitude of layers. And in these graphs, in these listings of what I've culled out of all the literature that I've read, is it improves amino acid absorption. And we need amino acids to build everything that our body runs on, all our proteins, our peptides, and everything. It helps drop inflammation, so the fibrosis in the liver. Growth hormone does that. Prior to these articles, most gastroenterologists and the guys who deal with gut and liver and all that, and hepatologists specialize in liver, said, you get fatty degeneration of the liver from alcohol. There's nothing we can do. You get it from just you're predisposed to it, called non-alcoholic fatty acid degeneration. And nothing we can do. Your liver's going to turn off and you're going to die. Well, now we have stuff to reverse it. We have phosphatidylcholine IV 1 gram over a slow drip, 3 hours or so, once a week for 12 weeks. We've done that. It works. It also removes the calcification on arteries. So one of my closest buddies, we did it with EDTA and then this phosphatidylcholine. It removed 40% of his calcification, not by me, by his cardiologist who was monitoring it, third-party monitoring it, And it helps with, in the brain, what happens. Well, let me back up. Growth hormone goes to the liver and turns on 10 proteins. IGF-1, IGF-2. IGF-2 is associated with repair of the brain. They find the highest level of IGF-2 in children, in neonates, newborns, because it helps with brain formation. It helps with brain growth. Then there's binding protein 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and now 7. Each one of them has been now found to benefit certain functionality in the body. The cardiologists know that binding protein 1 protects the heart. There was an article I just sent out. No, I will send out next week on our journal club, which talks about binding protein 1 protecting the heart. Okay, so these people with a COVID-related myocarditis, increasing their growth hormone will increase their IGF binding protein 1 and help with their heart. IGF-2 helps with diabetics, makes you more insulin sensitive. Binding protein 3 and 4 are anti-cancer. Out of binding protein 3, the Melbourne collaborative study out of 2006, out of Melbourne, Australia, showed a 48% reduction in colorectal cancer deaths, when 48% reduction, when you increase the binding protein 3, which is by quercetin, estradiol, and vitamin A can increase it. Also, exercise can increase it. So it gives you protection. Binding protein 5 for bone, binding protein 6 for nerve regeneration, and that's where I use it within my traumatic brain injury. There are an incredible amount of articles talking about lowering inflammation, which is what growth hormone does in the brain, just growth hormone, modulates inflammation in the brain. It's called a cytokine modulator. So it drops the interleukin 6 that we talked about, the interleukin 1, the interleukin or tumor necrosis factor alpha, which are caustic on the brain. So growth hormone has these benefits. It helps with muscle repair. It helps with scar reduction. I mean, in my youth of growth hormone, I was number one in growth hormone use in the United States for about 3 years, 40,000 units a year. And we had people with scars that disappeared. People with eyesight came back. One of our patients wrote an article. What's that?
That's just systemic use, or is that was there any specific protocol there?
Yeah. What you do is what we used was 1 unit, 1 unit a day in the morning, and then a secretagogue at night to keep the circuitry working. And believe it or not, in 48 hours of using growth hormone, that means 2 shots of growth hormone in the morning, in 48 hours, you've lost 40% of your natural production of growth hormone. In 30 days, 0 production of your own. And so what we did was we started a protocol, a hybrid protocol with injectable growth hormone in the morning and a secretagogue like secretopin or dinotropin at night, 2 puffs into the mouth, not under the tongue, just into the mouth. And we monitored their growth hormone levels. And when they were on the secretagogue, their growth hormone levels were higher than in those people who weren't on the secretagogue. And it makes sense. If you're producing 100 nanograms of growth hormone a day, IGF-1 a day, and you go on injectable growth hormone, your natural production of 100 disappears. So all your growth hormone and IGF-1 and all those proteins that are generated at the liver are coming from the injectable. How about this? We preserve your natural production and add to it an addition supplement of the injectable. So now you're getting the supplemental benefits and your natural added together. That's why we end up with a higher level. Okay?
Dr. Gordon, your breadth and depth of knowledge is truly remarkable. I want to talk a little bit about the supplements that you've put together specifically for men and women who ultimately want to optimize brain function. You've got a bunch of stuff on your website that looks truly amazing. And I know Millennium Health is the site. And if you could tell us about where that all started, why you started it, and who is the ideal person to take those up.
Well, no, just as you are, I'm an avid reader. I go through, 20 to 30 articles a week. And what happens is I'll read an article and I'll make a mention of something and I'll jump over to read about that. So I'm across an incredible array of journals from psychiatry, neuropsychophysiology, chemistry, this, that, and the other. And in the past, I personally used a lot of nootropics. So phosphatidylserine was one of the ones. How I got started on sledgely, how I got started on some of the other products that are out there that are nootropics. And those are pharmaceutically produced products, right? And I started looking at what is in nature that can help us do better without taking a pharmaceutical drug. And part of that led me to the question of, okay, why is it that we lose these monoamine oxidase, these neurotransmitters, this, and this? Why do we lose it? And it came back to the beginning. Neuroinflammation shuts down all these processes. So it became how to regenerate or how to enhance, improve our natural nootropics in our brain is by fixing why they go down. And why they go down is this inflammation. So there are certain products like quercetin and alpha tocopherol, vitamin A, and gamma tocopherol, vitamin E, and it's alpha, delta, and gamma. Alpha and gamma are the best ones. And when you mix them with quercetin, they together shut off one of the most important triggers for cytokines, pro-inflammatory cytokines. They call it NF-kappa B. So it shuts down this NF-kappa B trigger. And NF-kappa B goes into the nucleus of our cell and can turn on up to 400 processes that are inflammatory for the most part. So what our products do is they tone down those reactions. The federal government did studies on N-acetylcysteine, NAC, and glutathione. What that does is it drops inflammation. In the study that was done during the height of Gulf War, they took guys that were exposed to blast trauma. Within 24 hours, they put half of them into a placebo group and half of them into an N-acetylcysteine group, getting 400 milligrams twice a day for 7 days. And they monitored them. And they found the group that was not receiving N-acetylcysteine, that 89% of them had anger, insomnia, and depression within a week. Okay? I've seen it in 24 hours. I have a patient from Arkansas in 24 hours to develop that. And then the group that had the N-acetylcysteine, 86% of them had no symptoms. 14% of them had symptoms. Okay? 89% of those that were on placebo had symptoms. 11% did not. How do you account for the 11% who were on placebo who had no symptoms? And that deals with biological resiliency. And what biological resiliency is, each of us develops a protective barrier against things that happen to us. So I'd have a squad of guys that were exposed to a Scud missile. They all were exposed to blast trauma. Why is it that 1 or 2 out of the 6 or 8 guys developed symptoms and the rest of the people did not, or had attenuated symptoms? And if you start looking at things that embellish protection, which I, for them, call Kevlar, so it's, their vest with more Kevlar in it, and it would be things that they did that were positive for their system. So what's positive? Not drinking, hydrating well, eating good nutrition, vitamin supplements that might be naturally in good fruits and vegetables and so forth, okay? Meditating, sleeping well. These are all things that lead to improvement in their Kevlar vest. Yeah. And the ones that were symptomatic, they drank alcohol all the time. They didn't eat well. They didn't hydrate well. They did everything to diminish their biological resiliency.
Dr. Gordon, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. So we could talk for 5 more hours if we kept going. I want to be respectful of your time. Okay. That was so useful. We're gonna put together some great show notes with some summaries for the audience and a lot of action items where they can hear directly linked to your site and to your products and to these research studies you mentioned. So we're going to make sure we make this actionable for our audience. So I really, really respect you. I appreciate you. And so we're gonna tell them about millenniumhealthstore.com, where you can pick up Brain Rescue, 1, 2, 3. You have Clear Mind. They have a ton of products on here.
Yeah, but the most important one through our study with the military, with the Marines at Camp Pendleton, is the Brain Rescue 3.
Yep.
1 packet pre-breakfast. That's the key. Yeah,
I think looking at this site, I think 80% of the things on here are the things that I actually use. So it's phenomenal stuff. Like even in your store, all the things that most, you have the Dynatropin on there as well. Great.
There's Dynatropin on it. Yeah. And I'll send you a couple of codes so that your people can get the Dynatropin for free as part of a package. And then send a code specifically for your listeners if they're interested in trying anything.
Thank you, Dr. Gordon. I appreciate you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, Ben.
And that's a wrap, ladies and gents. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a loyal listener of the Muscle Intelligence Podcast. I realize there's a lot of incredible stuff out there, which is why I continue to seek out the world's greatest humans, people who ultimately keep going when everyone else stops, people who insist on finding solutions when everyone else throws up their hands. Thank you to Dr. Mark Gordon for continuing to push the envelope, for providing so much valuable insight. It was actually truly a pleasure to have this man on the show. It's been someone I've been looked up to for a long time. I did grow up with brain trauma. In fact, I had enormous amounts of brain inflammation as a kid from just an abysmal diet, from a toxic environment, and ultimately from terrible sleep habits, which just weren't valued in my home. I slept with the lights on, the TV on, probably slept 5 or 6 hours a night when I was like 7. And I grew up thinking that I had a learning disability, and I certainly had a speech impediment. That was a different story. But all these things led me to realize that as a kid, I had brain trauma on top of the fact that I played combat sports, I played football, I was in car accidents, like so many things. And so as I reached my university level years, I started researching ways to optimize my brain and actually came across Dr. Gordon many, many years ago. So it's truly a pleasure and honor to have him on the show. Head over to muscleintelligence.com/podcast. You can get the show notes and get links to his products, which I've been blessed to be able to try. So he's got some fantastic products. We will link to that in the show notes and so much more. And don't forget to check out our sponsors for today, Bioptimizers, bioptimizers.com/muscle. Use the code MUSCLE10 at checkout. I'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you so much for tuning into Muscle Intelligence. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to share it with at least one person you know. Make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Ben Pakulski and the producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.